My name's Kirsty Melville and I work with ABC Radio National's 360 Documentaries program. The kind of stories that I look for are stories that are going to sustain usually at least 20 minutes, sometimes up to 50 minutes. So it's quite a different story selection process to news or current affairs. I find my stories everywhere. I've found stories in the newspaper, I have found stories in my own head, I have found stories through friends, I find stories through contacts, I find stories on the radio, I find stories everywhere.
I produce the Drive program in Perth. I love it because it's got good hard news stories, but I think one of my favourite things is just all the little quirky observational stories and a bit of nostalgia, which I tend to do a lot of, which I really like. I think one of the best tools is this here. And I've been doing this probably for about 15 years and I get new folders all the time. And I collect news stories from newspapers, but I don't necessarily use them on that day. I'll use them on another day. And it's just a little tool. This is one I saved the other day. This poor New Zealand woman's had 3 sets of twins now. And it was sort of in the papers, but I'm just holding on to it for the day when I want to talk about twin stories. So what I also do with this, when I've got a little bit of a hole in the program, I'll just pick this up and I'll go through and I'll be reminded and think of something and I'll get a story out of it. I probably get a story out of this 3 times a week, just from all my old newspaper articles.
Yeah, I guess the most obvious one that we should probably get out of the way first is press releases, and obviously you've got to take them quite carefully. They are a genuine source of stories often, if not directly talking with the people that are listed in the releases, but finding another way around the story or finding out why these people are sending you this release, because they're obviously sending it in their interests. One example recently was a series of releases that came out from both sides of politics about funding that had been cut to the Asian honeybee eradication program, which is a pest here in the far north, and essentially they've decided they can't get rid of it. So what we did in that instance was, rather than going to either of those sides of politics, we went to the Honeybee Association, because they're the primary producers, they're the people that we're trying to serve more anyway, and they're the ones that have such a personal interest in it. Again, they've got their own interest, and you've got to challenge that and talk about why perhaps they say they need this funding, but nonetheless I think that gives you a different angle and helps you avoid just regurgitating what other people want you to say.
My most valuable resource is my personal network and my personal contacts, because the kinds of stories I do are not expert based, they're based on the lives of real people, with real people telling their own stories. I am very active on Twitter, and my current story has come through Twitter. And John Safran had said that we should all follow this woman called the Corey and the Don. And I thought, oh, that's odd, he doesn't normally do that. So I went and I checked her out, and she's this woman who coincidentally is living in WA, in Esperance, and she is writing to these black American prisoners in the deep south of the States. And so I'm now doing a story on her. I guess that's a very modern example of a way that you can find stories, is through social media.
One of my favourite ones, and it worked out really well, was one when I was just watching Deal or No Deal at home, I'm ashamed to say, and I just always laugh when I see the big cheques, and it just made me think, where do these big cheques come from? And I hunted down, there's one company in Australia, and all they do is make big cheques, and with all the different numbers on for all the game shows, and I rang them up, and all the different uses for cheques, you know, could be charities, had a chat about that, got taught back of all the people that have been given a cheque in their life, and it was hilarious. And some people have kept their big cheques and the amounts on the cheques, what they got it for. So that was just something I was sitting at home and I just sent myself an email, which is another really good advice, always send yourself notes, because the next morning you'll forget about it.
One of the ones that stands out for me was a huge water sale, the biggest sale of irrigation water to the federal government, still I think to this point. And I got a tip-off before it was publicly announced, because I'd had a really good relationship with one of the irrigators in the area that I covered. That meant that I could do all of the legwork, all of the research before the news became public. I could also put in calls to the company themselves, which meant I was first cab off the rank to get the interview, which is always nice, obviously.
My best advice for finding stories would be to never turn off, to always be on. There's always a little voice in the back of my head that's running in everything I do in my life. When I'm at the schoolyard picking up my kids, when I'm at work, when I'm out with my friends, when I'm reading a paper, listening to the radio, there's always this little voice that's saying, is there a story in that?
And it's an old cliche in some ways, but just to cold call people, just to ring a dozen people and say, look, I'm just having a bit of a ring around to see what's going on, and 9 times out of 10 you'll at least get one story out of it that is of genuine news value.
What other observational stuff? I heard some people just talking in the canteen the other day. That's what you do also over hear conversations, and they were just talking about pegs, and what they were saying was all the different uses for pegs. So I've got that sorted out for a program tomorrow, and maybe give a prize to the best use of a peg.
What will the prize be?
I reckon it might be an ABC book. Could be a book that I've already read. That's all it's going to be.